Hi, I'm Renee. I'm the Blue Hill Heritage Trust summer intern, and I have a little presentation here on the history of white pine trees. And so here I've got some pine tree flags. We have the 1901 Maine state flag. This is the Maine ensign, the sort of merchant and marine flag. This is an old flag of New England, based on a British flag, but with the pine tree here as a symbol of rebellion. This or something like it is probably what flew at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And then this, the Appeal to Heaven flag, was the first national flag chosen by the Continental Congress, used in 1775 and 1776. So you can see that pine trees were a really important symbol in the early history of our country, and in this region too. And that's because they were such an important resource in colonial times. Pine trees grow so straight and tall that they were perfect to serve as the masts of ships. And so when the British got here, they wanted to take control of that resource because it was so essential for their navy, and they'd cut down all the trees that were big enough on their own island. And so starting in 1691, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter, the Crown laid claims to all of the pines in Maine and Massachusetts over 24 inches that weren't on private land. And no one could cut those unless they were going to be used for the king's mass. And so those are marked with 3 strokes of a hatchet, the broad arrow mark, and you can still find those in the woods some days. And those white pine acts kept tightening and tightening. That restriction was extended over all of the Northeast from New Brunswick down to New Jersey, and tightened even to trees on private land. So you could own the land and still not have jurisdiction over the pine trees. And the colonists who were living here didn't like that so much. And they would cut the trees anyway. They would cut them and mill them to precisely 23 inches to hide that illegal origin. They would burn stands of trees and then salvage what was left of the lumber. And they would even get violent with the surveyors who came to mark trees and find people who were cutting them. They would come with mobs to beat them or throw them into ponds. And the most famous white pine riot was in 1772 in New Hampshire, when a surveyor came and fined a group of men for cutting pines. And they came back the next day and beat him 1 time for each fine he had claimed they owed. And that was a big symbol of revolution and was a big inspiration for the Boston Tea Party. So the white pine trees were a spark for the American Revolution. And they ended up being really key to winning the war as well, because these white pine masts had to be replaced every 3 years. And masts stopped going across the Atlantic in 1775, so by 1778, the British Navy was not in good shape. And that was when the French made an alliance with the Americans. And so French ships were sailing across the ocean to join the fighting, and the British got word of that and sent a force to intercept. But before they could get there, they got caught in a storm, and those old, weakened, rotting masts snapped one after another. The French ships made it across to the Americas without having to fire a single shot. And those ships, freshly outfitted with brand new masts, blockaded the harbor at Yorktown, allowing the Americans to lay siege on land in a really pivotal battle. And once again, the British sailed down to try and break that blockade, but the French fired on them and specifically shot to snap their masts. So they had to rush to replace them. But by the time they made it back, it was over, and General Cornwallis had surrendered. And so that's how white pine trees helped win the Revolutionary War.